Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you. Trust me. In the time you were on the show last year to now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favourite performance of you so far.
Picture this. A packed arena. Thousands of people on their feet, screaming, phones raised, capturing a moment nobody expects to witness twice in a lifetime. And in the middle of all that noise sits one man who almost never shows emotion on camera. Simon Cowell. The judge who has heard thousands of auditions, who has said no more times than most people say hello, suddenly looks like he has forgotten how to breathe. He isn't clapping. He isn't smiling. He's just staring, completely still, like he's been frozen by something he didn't see coming. That single frozen moment became one of the most talked about clips in the history of televised talent shows. The girl on stage was 13 years old. Her name was Courtney Hadwin, and in the space of 2.5 minutes, she went from an anonymous schoolgirl from a small town in the north of England to a name the entire world would be searching within hours. But here's the thing about viral moments. They are loud, bright, and impossible to ignore in the instant they happen. And then, almost always, the noise fades. The cameras move on. The next contestant walks out. The next headline replaces the last one. What happens to the person left standing in the silence after the lights go down? That's the story we're telling today. Not just the audition that made Courtney Hadwin a household name overnight, but everything that came after it. The record deal, the pressure, the disappearance from public view, the quiet years nobody talked about, and where she stands now, years later, after finally speaking for herself. Stick with us, because this one has more twists than most people realize. Courtney Hadwin was born on the 6th of July, 2004, in Hesleden, a small former mining village near Hartlepool in County Durham, in the northeast of England. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where opportunities for a career in music are not exactly falling out of the sky, and where a kid with a big voice has to build something out of nothing. She grew up with her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie, alongside her younger siblings. Music wasn't handed to her through some industry connection or a stage parent master plan. It came from the simple, ordinary place most real talent comes from. She just loved to sing, from a very young age, at home, in the kitchen, wherever she happened to be. As she got a little older, she dipped into musical theatre, tried out cover songs, and slowly built her confidence. By her own account, she started singing properly somewhere around 9 or 10 years old. Then, around 11, while she was a student, she performed at a school lunchtime open mic. She sang a cover of Say Something, made famous by Great Big World and Christina Aguilera. Someone filmed it. Someone uploaded it. And within the small but tightly connected online circles of her town, that video spread. Classmates were stunned. Teachers were stunned. This wasn't the voice they expected from someone her age, and word quickly got around that there was a serious talent hiding in a normal state school in a village most people outside the region had never heard of. From there, things started to snowball, but slowly, the way things do when you're doing it the hard way instead of the easy way. Her grandfather later revealed that she began busking on the streets to help pay for her own singing lessons and to help cover the family's travel costs to auditions. That's worth sitting with for a second. This wasn't a kid who was handed vocal coaching on a silver platter. She sang on street corners to fund her own dream. With whatever she earned, she was able to attend lessons at several local academies in her area, slowly refining a voice that was already unusual for someone her age. In 2015, she entered Teen Star UK, a regional singing competition, and made it all the way to the grand final singing a version of Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love. A year later, at 12 years old, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award and became a finalist in another regional talent showcase. That same year, she auditioned for Open MIC UK with a rendition of Nothing Compares to You, continuing to build a small but growing reputation on local stages. Then came a moment that, in hindsight, looks like a preview of what was coming. That summer, she opened for the band Sister Sledge at a festival in front of a crowd of roughly 18,000 people. For a young teenager from a small village, singing in front of a crowd that size was already a massive milestone, and it was becoming clear to the people around her that this wasn't just a local curiosity. This was someone with real, transferable stage presence. The following year, she appeared on The Voice Kids UK, delivering an audition of Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits that was strong enough to earn her a spot on a coach's team. She advanced through the rounds, performing songs like Dancing in the Street and James Brown's I Got You, I Feel Good, eventually finishing as a finalist. Across these early years, people around her noticed something that would later define her entire public image: an intense, almost disciplined work ethic. She practiced vocal exercises daily. She treated her craft seriously, long before most kids her age were thinking about careers at all. None of this would have been possible without her family. Her mother recognized early on that what her daughter was doing on stage went beyond a normal hobby. Her father took on extra work, delivering pizzas and picking up odd jobs, just to help fund petrol money and travel so Courtney could keep showing up to auditions and open mic nights across the northeast of England. When bigger opportunities eventually arrived in America, part of the family relocated to support her, with her father traveling back and forth so she could compete while still keeping up with her schooling. Whatever came later, one thing stayed constant throughout Courtney's early years: she wasn't chasing fame alone. She had people around her who believed in the work before the world ever noticed it. By early 2018, all of that groundwork led to an invitation to audition for the 13th season of America's Got Talent. It wasn't a plan she or her family had specifically pursued. It reportedly came through producers who were scouting international talent for the show. It turned out to be the opportunity that would completely change the direction of her life. At just 13 years old, Courtney walked out onto the America's Got Talent stage looking exactly like what she was: a nervous schoolgirl from a small English village, completely out of her element in a massive American television studio. She looked shy. She looked unsure of herself. And then the first notes of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle came out of her mouth, and the entire room changed. Her voice was raspy, powerful, and strange in the best possible way, like it belonged to someone who had lived several lifetimes more than a 13-year-old possibly could have. The nervous schoolgirl who had walked onto the stage seconds earlier was gone, replaced by a performer with wild energy and complete command of the room. Simon Cowell, a man famous for his blunt criticism and his refusal to be visibly impressed by almost anything, sat frozen. When he finally spoke, his words became one of the most quoted lines from that season. He told her she had walked out as a shy little thing, but the moment she opened her mouth to sing, she turned into something else entirely. Howie Mandel, one of the other judges, didn't even wait for the segment to finish talking. He hit the golden buzzer, sending her straight through to the live shows, and told her that her voice belonged to a completely different musical era, comparing her sound to legendary blues rock vocalists from decades earlier. The reaction online was immediate and enormous. Within hours, her audition clip was spreading across every corner of the internet. By the time later rounds of the competition aired, that same clip had been viewed hundreds of millions of times worldwide, an almost unheard-of number for a singing competition audition. Commentators, fans, and critics were already using words like generational talent to describe her. She advanced through the quarterfinals and semifinals, delivering performance after performance that blurred the usual line between child performer and seasoned professional. By the finale, she had a genuine international fan base. In the end, she didn't win the competition outright, ultimately placing among the finalists rather than taking the top spot. But by any reasonable measure, the competition had already done its job. It had introduced a completely unknown teenager from a small English village to a massive global audience, and it had turned her into one of the most talked-about breakout stars of that entire television season. Shortly after her run on the live shows ended, Simon Cowell signed her to his record label, in partnership with a major American label group. Just like that, a 13-year-old girl from a village most people had never heard of was suddenly a signed recording artist with a global platform. On paper, it sounded like the perfect fairy-tale ending. In reality, it was only the beginning of a much more complicated chapter. Fame moved fast, faster than anyone around her could really prepare for. Her audition played across talk shows and news segments internationally. Headlines compared her to some of the greatest voices in music history. Almost overnight, she became a recognizable name in America and an object of intense curiosity back home in the United Kingdom. Then, that December, she signed a long-term recording and publishing contract. In interviews around the announcement, she said she was thrilled to be joining the label, excited to write original music and stay true to herself. It was framed, understandably, as a dream coming true. What she didn't fully realize at the time was the weight that came attached to that dream. She was still a young teenager, still learning how to simply exist comfortably on a stage, and now she was expected to deliver chart-ready original music, handle interviews, and keep up a packed promotional schedule, all inside an industry machine built almost entirely around adult performers. Behind the scenes, she later described the mounting pressure of needing to bring huge energy to every single live performance, week after week, with very little room to simply be a teenager processing an enormous life change. Meanwhile, record executives began shaping her into a marketable image, pitching a sound, a persona, a stage identity. The comparisons to legendary blues and soul singers were flattering on the surface, but they also created an expectation that was almost impossible for anyone, let alone a young teenager, to consistently live up to. At 14, she found herself sitting in professional songwriting sessions with producers and industry teams who were often pushing her toward a more polished, radio-friendly pop soul sound, even as she was still figuring out her own artistic voice. She later reflected that people around her were constantly telling her what she should sound like and who she should be, and that somewhere in that process, she felt like she lost a sense of control over her own direction. It was, by her own description, both exciting and exhausting at the same time. She was flying between the UK and the US, expected to record original material, shoot promotional content, and stay constantly camera-ready, all while still technically being a schoolgirl navigating adolescence. Even as public praise continued to pour in online, privately she was struggling to feel like she was actually in charge of her own career. The tension eventually became too much to sustain quietly. Slowly, her public presence began to shrink. Social media posts became less frequent. Mainstream media appearances tapered off. Fans noticed the silence long before anyone explained it, and naturally, speculation started to fill the gap. Was there a falling out with the label? Was she unwell? Had something gone wrong behind the scenes? There were no clear public updates to settle the rumors, and in the absence of real information, imagination tends to run in every direction. In truth, she hadn't disappeared. She had stepped back, deliberately, to try to reclaim a sense of herself outside of the industry machine that had, in many ways, been built around her rather than with her. As the years passed, the connection between Courtney and Simon Cowell, which had never really been a personal mentorship in the first place, simply faded into the background of both of their lives. He was the executive who discovered her, the man who signed off on her contract and appeared at the big public moments, but he was never positioned as a hands-on mentor guiding her day to day. His job, at the end of the day, was to identify talent, not to manage the emotional weight that came with placing a young teenager inside a global spotlight. As new seasons of his shows moved forward with new discoveries, his professional attention moved forward too. There's no clear evidence that Courtney ever spoke publicly with bitterness about him specifically, but it's fair to say many observers speculated about how isolating it must have felt to be the center of that much attention and then, eventually, an afterthought in someone else's ongoing search for the next big voice. During this quieter period, Courtney began working with independent producers, building trust and creative relationships away from the label machinery that had shaped her earliest years in the industry. Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, known for his work with respected names in blues and rock music, became an important part of this next chapter. Slowly, away from the cameras, she began writing, recording, and eventually releasing music on terms that felt like her own. By the mid-2020s, Courtney had re-emerged as a noticeably different artist and a noticeably different person. Working independently, she began releasing songs that leaned into vulnerability, resilience, and personal identity rather than chasing a manufactured, radio-ready sound. Tracks with titles reflecting anger, heartbreak, and self-discovery started appearing, and in interviews she described the shift in blunt terms. For years, she felt like everyone around her was telling her who she should be, and it had taken time and distance to figure out who she actually was as an artist. She described this period as something close to a rebirth, a chance to make music that reflected her real experiences rather than someone else's marketing plan.